Potters. All right, we have a new project coming up, and that is going to be these sweet little tripod footed pots. Pretty cute. These are really fun because you can do all sorts of things to get different variety, and that's the other thing we're focusing on for this project is variety. So you're going to be making at least 3 of these cute little sweet pots using this technique. So you're not going to make them all exactly the same. You're going to experiment with textures and different techniques and ways of doing it. So they all have this technique of construction, but they all look a little bit different. Now, even with the ones that I have here, I'm already showing some variety. This one was just like my first very basic little footed pot. And then this one, I wanted to see how thin I could get the slab. So look at how thin that is. And then its little feet are a little bit, have a little bit more movement to them. And then this guy showed variety in the sense that it has 4 little feet instead of 3. The idea of making more than one, in this case at least 3, is that you have the opportunity to experiment. Now with these, I just used really kind of small slabs that I had laying around. But this one, I'm going to try to do much larger. So the first step is to take a straight edge and either cut this into, well, probably a rectangle would be the best. But you can use any dimensions of a rectangle and you're going to come up with a different pot. If you don't have a ruler at home, you can use a folder, piece of cardboard, anything that is straight. We want to make sure that we have nice, crisp lines. When you're holding your knife, you want to hold it straight up and down, not at an angle like this or like this, because we want this cut to be 90 degree to the surface. I'm going to keep this little piece. You're going to want a little piece to roll into a coil, like so. Okay, that's just one of the sides I cut off. I'm just rolling it into a coil. So you should have already made some slip that matches the clay of your color. If you're using our B mix, you would have your B mix slip or your dark clay body. And I'm going to take the wooden skewer. If you're in the studio, you could use a needle tool. And remember when you're slipping and scoring to kind of really dig in to that clay. Don't make little chicken scratches. You want these 2 pieces of clay to be able to grab onto each other. The snake is a little bit more difficult because you gotta kind of keep your fingers by it so it doesn't roll away from you. If you have a paintbrush laying around, you can use that to put your slip on, or you can just use your finger, it doesn't matter. If you do use a paintbrush, it'll just wash right out, so not a big deal. I don't want to put too much slip on here that it gets all goopy and spreads out all over the place. So we scored, we slipped, and then we're going to score again going the opposite direction. So it kind of ends up to be a crisscross. All right, now we're going to flip those over, and again we're just making this little coil of clay down here at this end. Like so. You'll see why here in a second. And then I'm going to score that again. All right, now we're going to, these 2 pieces of clay are going to go together like this. So we need to slip and score this side, so the top side, and then the back side of this up. I don't want to bend this too much, so I'm going to try to kind of support it with my arm, scoring it. Slipping it. When you're slipping it, you don't want to rub so much that you rub away those marks. I'm also going to do that over here. Score it again. Go in the opposite direction. And now you're gonna wrap this piece over in this piece. This one's pretty big. I recommend maybe starting out a little bit smaller, but I already done a couple small ones, so I was ready for a challenge. I'm gonna flip it over like so I can kind of let gravity help. So I'm just taking it a little bit at a time, supporting the inside and the outside. You want a nice, secure attachment. All right, so now we have this cylinder with no bottom. At this point too, if you wanted to work on smoothing this out a little bit more, it's nice to do it at this stage because you can fit your hand inside there and support it from the inside. Some people like to keep this seam and other people like to smooth it out. I'm gonna leave that up to you. I'm gonna just try to get it a little bit smaller. And then you also want your inside to look good, so make sure you're kind of smoothing the inside out. All right, here comes the fun part. So we're gonna do, for this one, a tripod. So I would start with just kind of doing this first, and then you're gonna slowly, don't do it too much at once, I'm slowly kind of compressing that clay together. Now, this is where that extra bead is helpful. So as I slowly pinch these together, that extra bead of clay or coil of clay is gonna help grab on to the next piece. Now take a piece of clay from the little bit you cut off and make a ball, like so. Flatten them out. Now score this up just a smidge, and this little button of clay a smidge. Put some slip on there. And this guy is gonna help seal that bottom. So that's the basic construction, and now you're just gonna kind of clean it up. So I'm just using my fingertips to smooth some of this out for starters. And then you can take your damp sponge, not wet, remember, get all that water out, and you can start smoothing it. If I'm supporting it on this side, I can really smooth that out nicely. You want this to appear as if there's really no transition. So I'm going to keep working on this. Another thing you can do is get your fingertips wet. Okay, so my fingertips are wet, and I'm going to take my damp fingertips or wet fingertips and kind of, with my fingers in that type of shape, like a triangle, I'm gonna go over each of these areas. Having your finger wet just gives you a little bit more control. Again, you don't want your pot to end up to be soaking wet. Don't do that. But it makes it slippery so you can pinch those feet out. You can keep them kind of sharper. You can smooth them out, make them duller. You do have to work on these feet, these little guys here. It's common to get a little bit of cracking here, so I'm just smoothing that out. I want to clean up some of this water. It's a little too wet. Remember, the less water you add to your pot, the better. Now this is the tricky part, is we want the inside to look as nice as the outside. It'll be easier on these larger pots. I will say on these smaller pots, it was a little bit more difficult to get my hand in there. So there you go, you guys. Here you have it. I kept my seam there. There's my tripod foot. These are nice too because you can flip them over to dry them. I would even, when you bring them to school, bring them flipped upside down just because the feet make it a little less stable until you fire it. So think of all the possibilities. You could add texture on these. You could add texture even before you start constructing them. I'll show you an example of that. Here's a slab I did, and I did some texture on actually the front and the back, so that when I go to construct it, the inside will have its own texture and the outside will have another texture. You could also do fun things with the rim. I'm going to cut this down. You could make short, stubby ones. You could make tall, skinny ones. You could cut out a design on paper. Here I'm just using the end of my ruler to make a scalloped edge. So even before you construct it, you could play around with making a different type of edge so that when you construct it, it has some variation to it. Remember, variation is what we're working on.